What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be an October wrap-up. It's a little bit late, but better late than never. I read 5. I read 6 books this month, 5 physical and then 1 on audio. Well, I kind of listened to this one both on audio and physical, but we'll get into that later. Overall, it was a pretty good reading month. There are a few 5 stars in here, so let's get into it. All right, first up is one that I was not sure about because it is incredibly hyped. And a lot of times I go into a book that has an insane amount of hype around it, and then you're just expecting so much, and when it doesn't knock you out of the water, you're disappointed. But this one did live up to the hype, and that was Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. So this, if you don't know, if you've been living under a rock, is about 6 strangers who are chosen by a man named Atlas. They're all talented in different ways. They all have some sort of different supernatural ability. The ones who are chosen will secure a life of power and prestige beyond their wildest dreams. It definitely had all of those dark academia vibes that I was hoping for. I sort of half listened to this one on audio. I found it on Libby, and I thought, well, while I'm in the car, like on my commute to work in the morning, it would be really fun to get a little bit of reading in then. And it has like an ensemble cast, so every character gets their own voice, their own audio actor, which was really cool. I don't think I've ever listened to an audiobook with an ensemble cast like that, so it definitely added a little bit of richness to the whole listening experience, so I thought that was pretty cool. Do you want to say hi? Are you uncomfortable? While it was really well written, I will say there were some times where it felt a little bit verbose, a little bit overwrought, a little bit too much, like she was trying to find the most sophisticated, articulate way of saying something that she could have said a lot simpler. Sometimes that works, like Donna Tartt's The Secret History. That's written so incredibly well, and she does write in a very academic way, but she does it so well. You can tell that she's very well read and very intelligent, and so it works. And this felt a little bit like she was reaching. That wasn't my favorite part, but it was still well written, and I still enjoyed listening to and reading it. All of the drama is very psychological. It's all based on the interplay of their relationships and who likes who and who's gonna protect who and who would kill who. It's got a really open ending because there is a second one coming out. The second one is called The Atlas Paradox, and I will most likely read that one because this one was left on such a cliffhanger that it kind of suckers you into picking up the second one. So this was a 5 out of 5. All right, next up was Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. I didn't really know too much going into this, and I feel like that's the best way to experience it. It follows a young female protagonist named Ada and her father. They live in a pretty small village, kind of on the edge of town. They are kind of recluses, but they have these special healing abilities, and so townspeople flock to them with their various ailments so that they can try to be healed. And the conflict comes in when a townsperson called Samson, a young man, comes in to be healed by Ada. Her father's not too crazy about the relationship that seems to be sparking between them. He ends up forbidding them to see each other. It says, but Ada is enraptured with his strength, his laughter, even his secrecy, and yet she knows that something's gone wrong inside Samson, something she's not certain even she can cure. So it's definitely kind of like the Atlas 6 in the sense that the drama is very psychological. I do have a reading blog on this, which I can link up in the cards if you guys want to watch that. It's super short. It's just under 200 pages. You could definitely read it in like a day if you wanted to. There's also something up with her father, which is never really explained. There's a lot that you're just supposed to kind of assume, a lot of things that are implied. In my notebook here, I put a quote that where she's talking about her father. She says, "Father was always more creaturely than me. There were nights when he would let his spine loosen and go running on all 4s through the woods, leaving sense and speech behind." Now, it never says explicitly what her father might be transforming into. I won't share anything any more detailed than that, just so nothing is spoiled. But I would say even the book doesn't really spoil anything. It's very... It almost felt like kind of an unexplored part of the plot, and I wasn't honestly totally sure why it was in there. If you guys have read this and you felt like there was some sort of metaphor happening there that you understood, definitely let me know what your thoughts are. I was a little bit confused why that was even a plot line at all, because it's not fully explored and it's not really ever explained or touched on in any sort of depth. There are some really interesting scenes in there where she's healing people, and Rainsford writes in a really interesting way. She's able to write about things inside, like internal body parts and things without it being gory. She's able to write about those things that another author might choose to be very abstract about, but she's very physical. Like, I felt like her examples were really concrete, and so I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This was another 5 out of 5 for this month. All right, next up is one that every person and their dog has read, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I only listened to this one on audiobook just to finally know what the hype was all about. It's a series. It was categorized erroneously as young adult for many years. Reminded me a little bit in the beginning of like The Hunger Games or something. It's kind of that same sort of dystopian vibe in the beginning, but then it opens up into this very fantastical world with all sorts of creatures. Long story short, the main character, Feyre, is given an ultimatum, and she ends up living in a whole other town away from her family, sort of imprisoned by a prince named Tamlin. And you can sort of guess where that's gonna go. They end up spending time together, and it's sort of a hate-to-love relationship. I wasn't a big fan of this one. I kind of knew that going into it. I'm not a big fan of high fantasy at all, so I don't have anything against this one. It is what it is. I can totally get why it's had as much hype and it's been as popular as it has been. I wasn't crazy about the sort of Stockholm syndrome-y kind of vibe that their relationship had. It felt essentially to me kind of like falling in love with her captor. Then the plot definitely takes off from there. There's a high queen who comes into play. There is a curse that Feyre finds out she's been a part of since the beginning. In my notes I said, long story short, Feyre must complete 3 tasks to keep herself and Tamlin alive. I won't say any more because it'll spoil the ending. I said fantasy's not my favorite genre. The writing is excellent. There were definitely some really beautiful descriptions of like the landscape and character descriptions. I will say I think the pacing is what's done the best. It really kept me hooked, even though, like I said, fantasy's not really my favorite. It kept rolling forward really quickly, and so I stayed interested. Their relationship was more lustful for sure than like romantic in my opinion, so it felt more like they were just kind of into each other in that sense and kind of united by a common enemy rather than truly in love. So I said I was never fully invested in their relationship. It felt more lustful than romantic. I said not sure who thought these would be a good YA series, but their reclassification as new adult is much more appropriate. I won't be continuing the series. Not because they're not well written, just because, again, high fantasy is not my favorite. So for me personally, it was a 3.5 out of 5. All right, next was one I thoroughly enjoyed, and that was Suburban Hell by Maureen Kilmer. I picked this up at Left Bank Books in St. Louis, Missouri. Boyfriend and I have a whole bunch of clips from St. Louis. I did a whole, like, basically the whole first week of Vlogtober was just all that trip. And of course I had to go to a couple of bookstores while I was there. So one of them was Left Bank Books. It was super fun. I had never seen this book around. I think probably because it's new. You walk in and then you turn right and then there's like a, I assume kind of new release, new fiction kind of stand. It reminded me of something Grady Hendrix might write, and so I thought I would give it a go. I'm glad I did. It was super fun. If you were into spoopy Halloween type things, like this would be one you could put on your TBR for next Halloween. It's not spooky at all. It's not scary. If anything, it kind of pokes fun at the horror genre. It essentially follows 4 friends. They're very tight-knit, kind of just suburban housewife type women, and they have this lovely idea to put a she shed in one of their backyards just to get away from the husbands and the kids. And what ends up happening is that they didn't expect their little home improvement project to release a demonic force that turns their quiet enclave into something out of a nightmare. Their friend is literally possessed by a demon, so it was a lot of fun. I gave it 4 stars. Definitely light horror, and I mean very, very light. This is like the no foam soy latte version of horror. There's really nothing scary in here. It's a lot of fun, so I do recommend it. I also have a reading vlog on this, so I will pop that in the cards for you if you guys are interested. Next is another 5 stars, and that is We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix. I've read almost his entire oeuvre now, almost all of his works. This one didn't disappoint me. I don't know if I like it more or less than the other ones I've read. I feel like I probably like them all equally. This one is like heavy metal meets demons kind of vibe. Definitely darker than Suburban Hell. So it follows Chris. She is the main character. In the 90s, she was the lead guitarist for a heavy metal band. And then when that band broke up, their lead singer kind of rocketed to stardom on a solo career. And so she and the other band members have just kind of been rotting in obscurity for decades now. I think this takes place in present day, which the book was published in 2018. So around that time, she like works at a Best Western. She's living a very average life. But then something happens to one of the other band members that's not so great. And she essentially embarks on a cross-country road trip to kind of confront the lead singer. It says her journey will take her from the Pennsylvania Rust Belt to a celebrity rehab center to a satanic music festival. So you do feel like you cover a lot of ground. The pacing was pretty good. I was kind of thoroughly engaged the whole time. I feel like a lot of us can relate to kind of feeling like you're trapped in a small town, so that's definitely how I found her to be the most relatable. And I just have to say, Grady Hendrix always gets the best like cover design, like cover art and formatting of everything. Even the book itself has, it looks like, you know, ancient runes or something. It's actually lyrics that they put in sort of a strange font and then flipped around backwards, but he just gets the coolest, and then like the sprayed edges, he just always gets the coolest stuff, the coolest, you know, design and formatting and everything. So it's always so fun to read because you feel so like immersed in the story when the book itself, like the formatting and the design, fits like the storyline so well. Anyway, I said overall it was a fun, fast-paced joyride of a novel. Loved the supernatural elements, even though they weren't like as explored or sort of explained as much as I maybe would have liked. There are so many chapters really peppered with musical lingo. I feel like he really did his research on how to talk about music, and so if you are actually a musician, I feel like you will understand what he's saying. Some of the words he was using, I was like, okay, that must be like a musical term. I did say the plot became kind of abstract at the end. I think he keeps it open for a reason. That way you can kind of interpret as the reader. You can sort of interpret your own meaning. Like it could be as sinister or as not as you want. So it's definitely kind of an open ending. So if you don't like that, you might not love the ending, but overall I recommend anything by Grady Hendrix. And then last up is From the Neck Up by Aaliyah Whiteley. I love this woman. I love everything she writes. I have talked about The Beauty before on my channel. I know I've mentioned it like multiple times. It's one of my favorite stories ever. It's kind of like a, I think it's like a novella. It's pretty short. It's not a short story, but it's very short. I will absolutely read anything that she writes. I have a couple other books by her on my shelf. A few I've gotten to, a few I haven't, so I will continue to read anything that she writes. She definitely has a recurring theme, a motif, if you will, of mushrooms. These yellow mushrooms, they are an essential part of The Beauty, and they also come up in a couple of these stories as well. So From the Neck Up is a short story collection. Every story covers such a wide range of like topics and places. It's hard to review a book like this. I'll just read part of the synopsis. It says, she deftly unpeels the strangeness of everyday life. Whiteley explores beguiling gardens, rebellious bodies, and unexpected journeys across familiar worlds with her trademark wit and imagination. It says, witness the future of farming in a new ice age, or the artist bringing life to glass, the many-eyed monsters we carry in the secret cities inside our bodies, the alien invasion of language to the chantress and her twists on the fairy tale. Fascinating and always unexpected, Whiteley is unlike any other writer working today. So if you like dystopic kind of science fiction, there are a lot of these that kind of have end of the world kind of vibes to them. There's one that has to do with like a talking decapitated head, like very weird, very uncanny, but always entertaining. So I definitely gave this one, I think, a 4 stars. There were some in here that, you know, you read and you're like, okay, like wasn't really crazy about that one. So I will give you some of the highlights. Brushwork, that is the first story. It follows a small colony of people trying to keep the last like living species of vegetables alive, and they each get like a different crop, and then some eco-terrorists come in, and that's kind of where the conflict begins. Many-Eyed Monsters takes a very literal approach to radically accepting like the ugly parts of yourself. I thought that was really interesting, that one. Lovers of the Long Dead, loved that one. It was really fascinating. It reminded me of The Host, actually, by Stephanie Meyer, because this ancient Egyptian princess, well, the ghost of one, she infects the mind and body of this scientist and kind of overwhelms her with memories and murderous thoughts about taking revenge on somebody who killed her. Reflection, Refraction, Dispersion was another one I really liked. It follows a young main character dealing with the loss of her mom and this mysterious light show that's been in the sky, and it's known as the Effect in the story. It shows the faces of people who've recently passed away. From the Neck Up, the title story, that's the one that follows the decapitated head, which I found to have an ending that was quite lighthearted. It was actually one of the more like positive stories, which is kind of funny considering what it's about. It had one of my favorite quotes. I'll read it for you now. The quote is, "It turned out happiness wasn't a mountain to be climbed at all. You didn't look up at it and wonder how anybody ever reached the summit. You simply ignored that mountain and went wherever your feet wanted to take you." I love that. It's one of those sentences that you read and you're like, dang, that's like super relatable. I really love that. She has a way of writing darker subject matter and like what could be really just gory and gross in a really sophisticated kind of way. I think maybe that's why I gravitate towards her so much. I said nothing was too gory or grotesque. There's always a metaphor just beneath the surface. So I don't feel like she's one of those authors who writes just for shock value. She's really trying to tell you something, like there's actually some sort of lesson that she's trying to get across to you, some sort of point to every story. So this was at least 4 out of 5. All right, guys, that is everything. Those are the 6 that I read. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you read any of these and what you thought. I definitely want to get into some discussions. Feel free to DM me on Instagram if you want to chat about anything. Let me know what you're reading in November, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. Jammel's been such a good kitty. What you been doing out here? I'm done.